Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. A very warm welcome to our webinar, Creating Better Use of Public Assets. My name is Nicola Mathers. I'm Chief Executive of Future of London. If you could take the slide down now, thanks, Sutton. If you're new to Future of London, we are an independent network supporting those working in planning, housing, regen and infrastructure. This event that we're running this afternoon is part of our Learning from Crisis programme. So that started up when we went into lockdown first time around last year and was all about sharing people's experiences of dealing with a crisis and then moving towards how people were dealing with recovery. The topic that we're choosing today, that we're going to be spending the next hour and a half debating and discussing, is use of property assets and how can we be thinking more creatively about how we use our assets in London. So this is recognising that local authorities are under huge amounts of pressure to fill their funding gap and the temptation to sell off their assets or achieve market rent levels is very tempting, but actually are we potentially missing a trick in delivering long-term social and economic benefit? Obviously there's a huge amount of pressure on landlords as well, with businesses folding due to the recession, due to COVID, people defaulting on their rents and leases. So again, we've also got that. We've got the wider debate around the future of high streets and the climate change agenda, which is also asking for us to really think how we use buildings rather than pulling them down and starting from scratch. So that's what we're going to be debating this afternoon. I'd like to thank our sponsors for enabling us to put on this event. So PRD, General Projects, Redo, and Hackney Wick and Fish Island Community Development Trust, all of which we'll be hearing from this afternoon. In terms of the running order, we've got 5 different perspectives on this issue from 5 speakers who are all going to give 5 minutes to start us off with. We really encourage you and want to encourage you to kind of get involved and make this as interactive as possible. So during the presentations, during the panel debate, please do share your experiences, your perspectives, whether you're from a London borough, a community group, an operator, a developer. Always opportunities to hear from other people. You might find some kindred spirits, you might find people to contact after the event. So really do encourage you to get involved. The last half an hour we're going to spend on a Q&A, so really think about using the Q&A box to post up your questions, and we'll try and cover as many of those as possible. Otherwise, use the chat function, as I said, to kind of share your experiences and perspectives. We really want to hear from you as well, because you're all experts as well as our wonderful panel. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our 5 panel members all together, and then we're going to kick off the event. So first of all, I'm absolutely delighted. We've got Roxana Fayez-OBE, who's the Mayor of Newham. Roxana's lived in the borough all her life. She's a fantastic champion for putting citizens first and is embedding a community wealth agenda across all of the policies in Newham. So Roxana is going to start us off by giving us a bit of perspective of what's going on in Newham and how they're thinking differently about their assets. Then Roxana will be followed by Dan Partridge, who's director at PRD, and Dan and Chris have been working with for years at Future of London. So delighted that they were willing to support this event and share with us the work they're doing with clients, both public, private and civic society clients, to help rethink how people use their assets and realise public value, development and economic outcomes. Now, Dan will then be followed by Binky Taylor. She's partner at the fantastic project, the Brixton Project, which is all about a community placemaking approach, using creativity to get more people involved in where they work and live. But Binky also has a role in international help and her International House, which I'm sure we'll hear all about, one of London's biggest affordable workspaces. And Binky plays a role in coordinating tenants to really kind of boost what that building has to offer the local community. Binky will be followed by Jacob Loftus, founder and CEO of General Projects, a creative-led real estate developer and an operator with a really strong belief in purpose development and social responsibilities. We'll be hearing from Jacob, the kind of developer and operator's perspective. And then finally, Louise Duggan, who's Northwest Area Manager at the Greater London Authority. And Louise is responsible for the Mayor's £75 million Good Growth Fund. And I know Louise can talk to us about how she's really kind of expanded the community groups, one other groups that can access that fund to deliver affordable workspace and community facilities. So I hope you agree, 5 interesting, different, diverse perspectives, but I'd like to hand over now to our first panellist, Roxana Fias. Over to you, Roxana.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and thank you especially for your really kind words, which make me feel slightly embarrassed, but very kind nonetheless. And also my welcome and thanks to all the participants on the panel and also guests that are here to listen to what we have to say. So the exam question that we've all been set, from our perspectives, what are the barriers and where are the opportunities to think more creatively about assets to support long-term economic recovery? And my 5 minutes worth will largely, as you would expect, derive from the experiences of what we've been trying to drive through in Newham since I stepped into office back in May 2018, but has become even more necessary, urgent and amplified as a strategic imperative for us as a consequence of the economic impact of COVID-19 and all the work that we've been doing around that over the past few months. So just in terms of, my reflections or perspectives to the exam question, I think it would be really remiss if I wasn't to just set out some of the context of Newham and what motivated me to put the community wealth building and inclusive economy agenda very much at the heart of what my administration was about. I'm, as Nicola mentioned, someone that's grown up in the borough, and I have vivid recollections of a geography and a place where the sense of community and people mattering and the locus of the local authority in that was very, very palpable, notwithstanding some of the challenges of growing up in a emerging multicultural community landscape and everything that was challenging about that during the 1970s and 1980s, which I'm clearly revealing my age. That aside, the reason I stepped into, well, I put myself forward to become the Mayor of Newham was, frankly put, I just didn't think the council was doing a good enough job in enabling the resident community and its population, which is incredibly diverse. 78% of our resident population from the ethnic minority communities. The council at the time, when I was a councillor between the period 2014 and 18, had essentially, it was felt and experienced by the community and community organisations as having turned its back on its people. And I had promised to rebuild that trust between the people and the council. And the important element of that was, how could we enable them to fulfil their potential and ensure that we're supportive of their ambitions, regardless of their backgrounds and personal circumstances. We embraced the community wealth building agenda because it was really important for me in the context of a local authority which is scarred by some of the devastating impacts of poverty and inequality that have been brought into real sharp focus during this pandemic, where 68% of our resident population are technically defined as living in poverty because of housing costs in an age where there has been growth, slow growth, wage stagnation, a real issue of the working poor that we're dealing with here in Newham, where we've got communities and neighbourhoods scarred by poverty. Yet we are the 9th largest local authority in the country with an annual spend of 1.5 billion, and I was intending to ensure that we repurposed our economic vision and plans and approach very much linked to that whole community wealth building ethos, so that we could ensure that that Newham pound that we were spending was benefiting our residents, both in terms of community infrastructure and building our communities to have a real and feel as if they're having a real stake. So in terms of that being the baseline of our approach to our recovery strategy, we've evolved our community wealth building strategy into our Towards a Better Newham strategy. And that's about ensuring that we continue to accelerate, even more so, very urgently, is the requirement, the existing assets to support our COVID-19 recovery here in the borough, to enable local enterprise and individuals and the voluntary and the community sector, small businesses, entrepreneurs, young people, to really benefit from the need that they are involved in the recovery journey ahead. And it's going to be a very challenging one. Many of you may be aware that Newham has the highest number of furlough workers anywhere in the capital. We've had one of the most significant increases, if not the most significant increase, in claimant count over the last several months because of COVID-19. So we are marshalling the entire organisation towards 8 pillars of recovery, of which the foundational pillar is the health, well-being and happiness of our residents. And then there are other important pillars relating to the way in which we leverage and repurpose the assets that we have locally to enable people to commence with their recovery journeys in an age where ready access to jobs simply will not be there. So it's about ensuring that we're helping them through what will be a challenging time for us all, but we're also opening up opportunity and enabling them to pivot with regards to their personal economic recovery journeys that will need to commence very soon. And I'll end by saying this, or by way of some concluding remarks for now. There are a huge amount of opportunities that we need to absolutely be thinking more creatively about, but some of the most seismic challenges and barriers that I have found, despite the job title of being the Mayor of Newham, is the cultural institutional mindset barrier, where stuff like this isn't even on the mind map or mindsets of an institution that has for too long, and this is not unusual in local government, practice in a very kind of hierarchical, the local council knows best. So I've got a dual challenge ahead of me, both in terms of unlocking all of those assets in those key recovery areas that we've identified across the borough in order to help people, because I've got to keep on reminding council officers, council departments, as well as my cabinet, that we're here about people first, and we've got to marshal the instruments of the organisation to make sure that happens, and that includes via our asset base. So I'll end there. I trust that's helpful, Nicola. Thank you.
Okay, that's a hard, tough act to follow. I guess at PRD we've been lucky to spend quite a lot of time working with Newham and also with Camden, RBKC, Westway Trust and others to look at the potential for assets to unlock an inclusive economic recovery. And we've been working very closely with colleagues at 3Space and Redo, its advisory arm. And we've put together what we call a better approach to affordable workspace, actually, which is a little manifesto of things we've learned over that period. And I think at the heart of our argument, very open for debate, is we kind of feel that the traditional affordable workspace approach is really missing a trick in terms of existing buildings and how they're used to create better value. Why is it not working? Well, much like for housing, affordable workspace is a loaded but ill-defined term. And what that means is in planning policy, you get a real raft of different approaches across London with very sort of little after the act type leverage to get these things actually affected. Section 106 is quite a blunt instrument, as we know, and used quite variably. There are clear market failures often in the link between the spaces and the end users and passing on that affordability to those for whom it's actually intended. There's a need for more and varied intermediaries, and there's quite a big challenge, I think Roxana touched upon it there, between challenging and reconciling best value and public value, and in terms of policy setting and carry through and the public sector side. But why does it matter that we get this right? Well, even before COVID, we were all facing a need for a new focus on local and the diversity of issues around the viability of our town centres and our high streets. COVID has exacerbated those challenges, and also in the communities where they've got the least access to assets and opportunities, these have been driven even harder. So part of that recovery is about finding the assets in the right places to deliver a truly inclusive economic recovery. And so we think that many of the buildings that are already there are actually in the right places. The right places can be corporate assets and commercial assets under local authority control. And actually we think that sometimes reusing a building can actually be a greener opportunity than developing something new. And it's something that's already there and available. So there are several benefits to this, but we know that there are a number of challenges, and some of those that we're coming across are, how do we balance the sort of potential offset of income or drop in income from using assets differently and providing a discount? How does asset management function and draw together regeneration and property considerations? How do we use this opportunity to make markets and make sure that the types of opportunities that are being provided in that area are relevant to the aspirations and potential of that area and its communities? And what's the mechanism for value capture? All of these great things like economic growth make sense to the viability and success of places, but they're really difficult to reconcile with local authority and local government spending and the way it needs to set its budgets. But notwithstanding that, we think there's a real case to act here. There's a long-term return on investment for town centres and cities in social, investment, capital growth potentially, place definition, and all these wider benefits. I think Harry is in the crowd probably from Three Space, and we'll probably hear a bit more about the International House experience, the vital role it's had in resetting the economic definition in its part of Brixton and in creating an income for the council and also a broad raft of different inclusive economic outcomes. So there are ways to make this work, and I think we'll probably get onto that in a bit more in the debate. And at the heart of our argument is, let's not let the challenges offset this great opportunity to start using our existing buildings in a brighter and better way right now.
Sarah, you're on mute, Binky.
Hi everybody, I'm Binky Taylor from the Brixton Project. We are residents of International House in Brixton, and I think in fact we were the first residents of International House. I want to talk about that today and the kind of incredible approach that Three Space have taken to allowing International House tenants to kind of seed the space in a really interesting way. So I arrived in the autumn of 2018. I was on one of the give floors. There are 5 give floors. So we were on floor 6, and I think I was sitting in the corner by myself. But I was very, very soon joined by companies and organisations that I've been used to working with in Brixton, on the basis that we are all kind of there to work on Brixton. And I think that's an important point to make. Creating a space like International House for a community to work on the community is a serious benefit for the council, because it means that we are also sort of fulfilling on their wider vision and strategy. But also in terms of community empowerment, it means that we are all working together. You know, collaboration is absolutely key, and spaces like International House allow us to do that. For the most part, we're all addressing the same issues, and they're the issues that Roxana so eloquently outlined in her speech earlier. But we are able to come at them from different perspectives together. And that's a really very powerful way of working, and we all benefit from it. All of our practices benefit from that. It's very unusual to find a space that will house not just the Business Improvement District Office, but also the local paper, alongside a number of socially focused businesses, a number of organisations run by and for young people. In such a way, we become an engine for Brixton. And that's been a really very powerful experience. It's an environment where the community itself becomes an asset. And I think that is, in terms of communities moving forward post-pandemic, that is where the power needs to be. We have a wealth of knowledge, we have skills to invest in building our communities and leading them through recovery. And this is a vital tool, I think, for councils to be using in this way. And to encourage also the thought that economics is now, local economics is now a well-being issue, and which means factoring in a range of value beyond money. And you know, number one priority has to be the opportunity that spaces can give to local people. Interested in what Dan was saying about the reuse and the refurbish. This has a huge cultural value as well. I mean, communities are beset by feelings of gentrification and actually the spaces changing without input or without a sense of their own identity within it. And a space like Three Space, which has been reused and it's been very, very gently refurbished whilst people are in it, means that the people themselves are shaping it. We are shaping the space. So it is informed by the tenant community, it's not imposed, and it's clearly identified by the wider community as not being a gentrified space. I think, again, this is incredibly important for councils if they are wishing to create a kind of balanced feeling in communities. This is a sort of tenet of community placemaking. People need to feel that they belong, and the people in the Three Space feel that they belong. And that's important in countering the persistent feeling that spaces are built to attract those from outside. In addition to that, I've put down here the kitchen culture. The kitchen culture at Three Space is really very interesting. It's, we're not gossiping around the kettle. We are productively creating new ideas and shaping a future for the place that we all love. This is nurturing a very deep sense of well-being, resilience, empowerment, all the words that we want to see and associate with a kind of healthy, thriving community. A classic example of that is if we are looking to contract anybody as part of our work, as one of our projects, we will look at the people in the building, but first of all, we will look at the young people in the building. So this is also a space that's all about the future. It's, it's incredibly important and not to be overlooked by councils in terms of this as being a short-term plug, perhaps in a space which could be seen as meanwhile. If they can attach some long-term vision to this thinking, then you really are seeding a very healthy future for what and who comes next.
Great, thank you so much, Binky. To Jacob.
Hi everyone, lovely to meet you all. My name is Jacob Loftus. I'm the CEO and founder of General Projects. We're a creative-led real estate developer and a workspace operator that aims to deliver inspiring and sustainable ecosystems to help businesses thrive and communities to prosper. Across London, we're developing over 1 million square feet of unique SME workspace hubs and over 350 beautiful new homes alongside exceptional public and community spaces. Our ambition is to always deliver user-centric projects that innovate and inspire and hopefully push the boundaries on the expected norms. Our workspace platform, General People, is supporting over 250 SMEs across London, employing over 2,000 people. I think for us, we sort of see this debate with both a developer hat on and a workspace operator hat on. And I think for me, the most interesting question about today's discussion is really about, I think, the challenge of balancing best value or profit, as the property world would call it, and delivering sustainable, meaningful, inclusive, social and local impact, which I'll define as purpose for now. I think there's a big stigma associated with the property industry, rightly so. I think there's always been this traditional tug of war between profit on one side and purpose on the other. And development is generally seen as a bit of a zero-sum game. If the developer wins, the community loses, and if the community wins, the developer loses. And that's kind of how the industry has typically thought. And for me, I don't think it needs to be this way at all. I think in particular over the last few years, as society has increasingly begun to value the importance of sustainability, the importance of helping those less fortunate, of engaging, not alienating communities, I think there's an entirely new business model and opportunity that's emerged. And with COVID, this is even more resonant today. It's one we've been championing for some time now, and we call it the 2 + 2 = 5 business model. So we've learnt and can pretty quantitatively demonstrate that companies in our ecosystems, in our business hubs, place a massive value on the social and environmental investments that we make into our buildings. When we partner with local schools to mentor young people, businesses in our centres who we encourage to participate in the programmes see it as a big positive. When we recycle thousands of tonnes of materials every year through our buildings, or we operate skills and training programmes free of charge for young local people, or we give away free desks to young startups, it enforces and reinforces a stronger community within our buildings and makes our businesses want to stay in our centres much longer than they ever planned to. And the more we foster links between our businesses, local supply chains, local schools, the more our businesses become embedded in the community and the longer they stay. So we see there being this kind of virtuous circle that the more connections we create, the more holistically we think about the whole, the more value that's created. And ultimately, we think that the profit and purpose side of things, far from being mutually exclusive, actually contributes enormously to one another. I'm sure a few people out there are listening to this somewhat skeptical, thinking whether this really works in practice. So I thought it would be useful to share a few practical examples of how we're actually making this happen in partnership with various local authorities where we've had some good success delivering 2 + 2 = 5. So in Newham, as Roxana knows well, we own the largest SME business hub in East London, home to 150 local businesses, employing over 1,000 people. In collaboration with the council, we actually launched a very substantial community wealth building programme about 12 months ago, which has seen over 100 young people from local schools being mentored every year by the businesses based in our centre. We've committed to providing and creating 20 new apprenticeships every year, and we actually offer subsidies to businesses in the centre that take on an apprentice. We're operating a free skills and training programme for young people alongside an incubator, and we've given away 25 free desks to young local people who are starting new businesses. With PRD's help, we've worked out that the centre will generate over £4 million of social value over the next 5 years and contribute over £25 million of gross value added to the borough. Whilst there's a real financial cost to running this social impact programme, alongside the time, energy and resource that we have to commit to make it happen, we're doing it because we believe we have an obligation to give back to the community and contribute to its growth. But of equal importance, we also genuinely believe it's good business for us. And for me, that's the big mindset shift that the industry really needs to make. When we talk to the companies based at Expressway, they tell us how much they respect and support the initiatives. And a huge number of them have taken on the opportunity to participate in our programs, and they're delighted to have the opportunity to give back. We can see so clearly that creating places with an ethical and impactful agenda creates a stronger community and therefore helps to create value. We've invested £19 million into that project, all of which is 100% private money with no local authority subsidies or grants. And despite COVID, despite all of the investment in social infrastructure, we're making a profit and it works. Elsewhere in Southwark, we're restoring and reinventing the Woolworth Town Hall into a community-focused SME workspace hub. We're going to operate a very similar community wealth building programme there as well. But on top of that, having consulted extensively with the local community when we started the project, we understood that people were really craving a new community space that different groups could operate. So we've taken a 3,000 square foot piece of the ground floor and given that back free of charge forever to the community. We've partnered with 20 different local community groups that each get use of the space for a few weeks at a time to ensure that over 10,000 local residents from all walks of life can have different programs and activities within that space that are relevant to them. Now, the traditional real estate model might have seen giving up that valuable space for nothing as, you know, a major challenge and not something you would intuitively do. But actually, stepping back and looking at the big picture, we think that the building becoming this new central hub for the whole area with thousands of people coming to events, performances, training seminars every year will reinforce our hub as the absolute place to be, generating footfall, buzz and activity. So ultimately, it's going to help the project as a whole be much more successful. Finally, in Manchester, we've partnered with the City Council there.
Could I suggest we come back to Manchester because we're running a little bit over time, if that's all right.
Okay,
Cool.
So we'll come back to you on Manchester. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Nicola, and thanks to all the other speakers for such kind of thought-provoking presentations. And I hope this generates a few thoughts in people's heads. So as Nicola said in the intro, I ran the Good Growth Fund programme, which is the Mayor's kind of primary regen programme over the last 4 years, delivering £75 million investment into a wide range of projects, working with a broad range of partners across London. And it's been my real sort of privilege to, you know, support those projects, to go further and to do more, but also to learn from those projects about the different ways and the different approaches to delivering on the kind of idea of good growth in London. Flipping to today, I'm very much drawing on that experience and those lessons that I've learned from, you know, it's not that I'm generating all this insight, it's the exposure and experience that I bring into the recovery agenda. I think Roxana did an amazing intro, and, you know, as a city, we're facing the most challenging period in recent history. The economic, the social, the health impacts of COVID-19 cannot be overstated. But when we think about the kind of challenges from a sort of a city scale, I guess I see there being a couple of challenges that are regulatory. And one of those is business rates. And it's business rates because of the cost that burden puts onto businesses operating on the high street or commercially in London. But it's also in terms of how you actually fund public services. So it's not just a kind of, you know, a business conversation, it's a wider thing, it's an interdependency. The other thing that I see as one of the big regulatory kind of challenges or threats that we are facing is the proposed extension to permitted development rights. And unless there's a lot of shy supporters out there, every single session I'm in at the moment, I kind of try to canvass opinion, and it's unique in the kind of level of kind of the lack of welcome that seems to be receiving across the piece. Like Roxana, I think there are significant cultural habits that we need to address. The top one for me is debunking the illusion that you can focus within a red line or on a singular bottom line and succeed. And that's in a public or in a private context. You know, that's just not the case anymore. We are in an era of interdependency. Tenants, landlords, communities, public and private interests, each need each other to do their bit. In terms of opportunities, this is the main pitch, I think we do really well to reflect on what's been achieved in the past year, actually, by organisations that have jettisoned that kind of singular approach. Businesses, social enterprises, local networks have all been activated and responded to the challenge. They've adapted how they work, but they've also coordinated with boroughs to support local communities to do the same throughout the pandemic. And I think if we just hold on to that, that will be a major success. And for today, I guess the question is, how do we leverage property and assets to support this kind of behaviour and to nourish and to nurture this kind of resilience? And I'm approaching this from that kind of city level, as I said, and for me, I'm quite optimistic about the grand challenge and mission approach that's being adopted. So again, a little bit like the story that Roxana told about, you know, adapting their kind of community wealth strategy into their recovery strategy and embedding it there. I think there's something to speak about value and friction. And at the moment, it's really hard to make these innovative approaches stick So it's really our job to figure out the systems and the processes and the methodologies to kind of enable to unlock that kind of potential value. The Grand Challenge recognises that we need to restore confidence in the city, that we need to minimise the impact on London's most vulnerable communities, and that we need to rebuild the city's economy and its society. One without the other falls down. The missions-based working, I think, is really interesting because it recognises that we all have a role to play in recovery, and also that it requires an alignment of interests targeting these shared goals for recovery. I think local government in particular is going to be asked to act as steward, as convener, as partnership builder, as strategist, as coordinator of action, while at the same time continuing to deliver social care, to protect the most vulnerable, to educate our children, to keep the roads open, to collect our bins, etc. Central government needs to help recovery by putting in place supportive policies and funding. We need to resolve long-standing issues like business rates. And we also need to realise, as Roxana made the case very compellingly from a Newham perspective, that need exists in London and that London is integral to the UK recovery. The development and management of property, which is what we're here to talk about today, of course is a key driver for change, and particularly in London. I think as we emerge from the pandemic, we have to get more intelligent about how we leverage this, how we remove the friction, how we unleash the kind of potential to support our vibrant local economies, to focus on what's happening in the CAS, the Central Activities Zone, and to support and continue to attract the specialist organisations and sectors that choose to locate in London. But none of this is really worth anything at all if we don't address the social, economic and health inequalities that have been exacerbated in London and of course across the UK. If we're not helping to connect communities, Binky's discussion about what she's doing down in Brixton was really inspirational there. And if we're not responding to the climate emergency, a strong economic recovery needs to ensure that local economies have social purpose, that they create new opportunities for local ownership, and that they generate community wealth. Within the high street, within the kind of recovery construct and the recovery board, I'm very much engaged in the High Streets for All mission. And that's very much focused on where all the policy objectives that we have across London government actually ground and actually happen. And that's the link to this property conversation. There's two key actions that are coming out of that work that are of relevance to today's conversation. One is the High Streets for All Challenge Fund, which we'll be launching in mid-March. And that's all about how local partnerships can respond to recovery challenges and develop innovative place-based approaches that reflect local need and priorities. And I guess assets become the fulcrum for that kind of partnership building and for partnership formation and strategy development. The other point that I would just introduce here, and we can unpack later, is a high street property charter. Now we're engaged with London councils, with the various boroughs and cross anchor institutions and public and private landowners. We're having a conversation with them to try to bring together London's varied property interests around these shared goals. We're talking about kind of exemplifying the behaviours that can contribute to recovery, and that by setting common standards and showcasing this best practice, we can all play our role in the wider recovery agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think really inspiring, some really good practical examples of what's possible. So thank you so much, and great to have those different perspectives on how we can move this agenda forward. I think we're going to have just a sort of 10 minutes or so of chat, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So if you haven't already put your question in the Q&A, please do. We've got a good number already. My first question really comes back to Roxana and maybe to Louise as well, is obviously the pressures under a local authority are absolutely huge, given, and you sort of really painted us a picture of the crisis that's happening in Newham, and the levels of unemployment, people on universal credit, etc. So how can you as a borough, or what would you say to other boroughs who are looking at this and thinking there's a real potential for us to use our properties, but I'm under so much pressure to sell things off or to get market rents? What sort of case do you make? What would you advise to other boroughs who are really interested in taking this forward? I think you might be on mute.
Better now?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Brilliant. Hopefully I'm clear and as loud as some of the guests need me to be. Really good question, and it is a challenge because part of what we're needing to do and what we've spent several months doing through our analysis of the claimant data, the ongoing furlough watch that we're keeping abreast of. We've got the highest number of furlough residents. Our claimant count has increased by some 297% since the start of the pandemic. It was 12,500 in February 2020 and then shot up to some 24,500 by May 2020, and we're seeing an increase of 500 a month. And how we've sort of marshaled the organisation towards ways in which we will leverage our assets to enable access to residents, community groups, is through the pillars that I made reference to before. One of our pillars is the pillar 5, and that's making sure that we work towards opening spaces for work, ideas and community. So you've got that real diversity of mix, which responds to some of the sustainability comments that have been made on the chat, and making sure that we're targeting in the immediate first step in some of those pre-existing regeneration projects where we've been pumping lots of money in any case. So we've got a major development program underway in Canning Town and in Custom House. These are both areas that have suffered quite badly under previous economic downturns, and because there hadn't been that creative and innovative thinking from the council at the time during those financial dips, you had the stagnation that occurred, and then that trust deficit increasing even more so. We've got the Carpenters Estate, we've got Green Street, which has been particularly hit because it's a local high street, well famed for popular community market, Queen's Market, and we've managed, working together with the GLA, to get good growth money into the market to initiate the most significant regeneration of the market in a generation, but also how the market is located in the wider Green Street piece, which was a retail destination point for many visitors outside of Newham as well as from Newham, because of its specialist in Indian and Asian diaspora garments. And they've really felt the hit because they're heavily reliant on weddings, and obviously during lockdown, weddings can't take place. So making sure that as part of our accelerated recovery in the short term, we're targeting those areas where we had already been looking at, we had already been making investments through regeneration programs, and because of COVID-19 and as part of the marshalling in response to COVID-19, as part of our recovery, accelerating the work that we're doing in those areas and then widening them out as part of pre-existing strategies relating to improving our local high streets, town centres, because we've also adopted as one of our pillars the 15-minute neighbourhood concept, whereby all your basic essentials will be a 15-minute walk or cycle, and that again will require us to mobilise our assets in a way that you've got that really good balanced mix of work, the professionals, entrepreneurs, small businesses, incubator businesses, idea generators, and the community. And we're also specifically doing targeted work for our young people as one of our substantive pillars. We've promised to help every under 25-year-old with their economic recovery journeys where they want them, because we know that young people in particular, when it comes to the revival of the economy at some point, they will be hard hit and will be the last ones to, feel that build back fairer piece that we all talk about.
Thank you. So it's really all about having a very clear strategy, a very clear direction, and then making assets an absolute integral part of that strategy. So you couldn't deliver it without thinking about your property assets. That's really helpful. Thank you. And I guess, so this is a question to the panel, and what I'd like to also bring in Alex Russell. And Alex is the executive chair of the Hackney Wick and Fish Island Community Development Trust. So if all goes, if the technology is going to work, we're going to bring Alex in to also help answer this question, which is for everyone on the panel. So do put your hands up if you want to answer this. It's about how can we change the way we define value to include long-term and social economic benefit, and maybe starting off with Jacob and Daniel, maybe first off, and if we can get Alex in as well. Hi Alex, just to kind of say how can we, and any practical examples of how it's been done would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for having me. It's been a fascinating debate so far, and I'm very supportive of what's been said. I mean, I think, there's a whole raft of social values and indicators that local authorities will be measuring themselves against, whether that's kind of around jobs and employment and enterprise and business and skills and training, or whether it's health and well-being and promoting healthy environments, whether it's tackling social issues, promoting culture and heritage, and enabling kind of community cohesion and belonging. All of those things are important and valuable and are hardwired into what local authorities need to be doing, I suppose. At an overarching level, my interest is in how we build sort of resilience and self-sufficiency, and how the community can have a much greater stake in how those things are delivered. I think in doing that, not only are you giving a man a fish, to coin the phrase, but you're also giving the community a fishing rod, and the community has a responsibility in delivering for itself. And I think what happens in those situations is that community, for a start, can be agile and nimble about what's most needed at any one time. And you take this crisis now, and communities having control and stake over some of the assets means that it can very quickly pivot to be able to respond to what's going on locally. But also, I think there's a greater sense of people feeling as if they have a belonging. In Hackney Wick and Fish Island, we have an incredible collection of creative industries and social enterprises that have made incredible use of underused warehouses mainly, and creating creative spaces and a vibrancy in the area, which has made it a very attractive place to be, and has meant that property developers are interested, and housing gets built, and people are making money, and that's fine. Unfortunately, where we find ourselves is that as a community, we don't really have much of a stake in what's happening here, and so the things that are happening particularly in the creative industries are kind of being moved on, and we have no certainty about how we can protect that and how we can preserve that and how we can develop that. And I think while we've got all of these kind of social indicators around creating opportunities for people, I do think there's something quite powerful about ensuring that the community has a stake in this, and whether it's a power share in terms of that, in terms of delivering in public assets together with local authorities, or whether it's having passing over responsibility entirely to communities. I think there's a huge amount of added value that can be created in doing that. And I think Roxana's kind of alluding to that, and Binky certainly was in her piece, that can be difficult to measure, but I think what it means is communities have control, have a sense of place and a sense of belonging, and feel as if they're part of a journey of change rather than being kind of done to, which I think somebody else mentioned earlier. So I'm the advocate for that, and where there's added value in involving communities and having a stake in some of this discussion. And I would say there's a big opportunity in East London and Hackney Wick with LLDC and their future role, and where the community sits with that actually. And I think a conversation with colleagues in Newham and the GLA about what happens to the Olympic Park. It's such a symbolic and significant part of London, and whether there is an opportunity for communities to have a stake in the future running of assets there, I think would be a really good way in which GLA and local authorities can demonstrate that what they mean by this.
Okay, thanks very much, Alex. I think I'd also like to bring Harry Owen-Jones in. Harry, if you're there, is a director at Redo, who's one of the sponsors for the event today, which is a workspace and urban regeneration consultancy. And there's a question really to Harry and to Jacob and Dan about how do you make affordable workspace viable and what are the risks? And I'm interested maybe from you, Jacob, as well, as to what are investors saying about this? Because we hear a lot of investors saying, oh, yes, they want to invest in community, but how do you have a conversation with them about, well, actually, this means that are you going to make less return, but it's going to be longer term? Is that, what's the sort of conversation you're having with investors? So we've got Harry in, brilliant. Hi, Harry. Hi. So yeah, so the question maybe to you first, Harry, and then to Jacob and Daniel is about how do you make affordable workspace viable, and what are the risks around this approach?
Thank you, Nicola. So yeah, I think as ever with viability, it's about trying to keep your costs down whilst driving the revenues. But in this instance, it's about increasing revenue without actually diminishing the social value outputs, which are tied to the whole sort of mission of providing affordable workspace. So I think there are three main considerations here. The first one's around ownership. If you own the building, then you control the building's outputs, and part of that is very much the rent levels. So it's not just the social outputs; it's also the rent levels. So if you have either a local authority or some other public sector body who is prepared to actually own the building, then they can set the rent level in a way which will ensure viability. So that is the first point I'd make about keeping costs down. The second one around costs is about what type of building affordable space should be provided in, and it's one that has already been touched on here. Even if you are providing space at a below market level as a product of a new development and Section 106, that is all going to be offset by the other associated cost barriers that come with that. So increased business rates, service charge, upfront fit-out costs. They're all going to wipe out any saving which you would have made. So our approach would be to suggest that it should either be existing buildings within a local authority's portfolio, or for a local authority to be more interventionist and to actually look to acquire key strategic sites. So that's point two, that it should be in old buildings, and that'll help bring the costs down. And then the other one is around how can you actually look to increase your revenues? And our answer to this is to have quite a diverse sort of economic range of activity within the building. So this allows for cross subsidy. So you have more commercial activity which sits alongside more sort of social and cultural activity, and so the more commercial stuff will in turn cross-subsidise the other. And this is the approach we've taken at International House, where we have a model we call buy give work, which is a one-for-one, and this is the only sort of feasible way we see which can I guess safeguard some of the activity which would otherwise be at risk of displacement from our town centres.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Harry. Jacob and Daniel, did you want to come in on that just literally for 2 minutes, because I think we've got loads of questions to get through, so we'll move on to the Q&A.
I have one very brief thought on affordable workspace, which is I think it's a fundamentally important provision that should be required of developers moving forward. I fully agree with the principle of it. I think one of the biggest problems is if someone's building a 80,000 square foot office building, for a small sliver of that building to be designated affordable workspace sort of means it doesn't really do anything for anyone. It's too small for an affordable workspace operator to manage efficiently. There's no economies of scale. It's not big enough to create a hub. It just sort of becomes an afterthought piece that no one's, it doesn't make sense for anyone to operate. And I think what would be much better from a local authority standpoint is to say all future office development needs to provide an affordable workspace. That needs to be a contribution in lieu. And then the local authority takes that bucket of money and either within existing property assets that the local authority owns or assets that the local authority can buy with that pot of money, the local authority then controls and delivers larger scale, meaningful, purposeful, affordable workspace hubs where the council's in control. They can partner with an accredited affordable workspace operator and they can create something of a meaningful scale, which can then really do something to kind of give back to local communities, create opportunity for young people, and provide a viable business model for the affordable workspace operators as well.
Yeah, I guess I would fully support that, and the ability to take a commuted sum from development and put it into the right spaces to create genuine affordability, for me feels like an absolute no-brainer. It's a woolly policy area and it needs more work. And I would go back to the value point again. We've all talked about inclusive economic outcomes, and we know there are boroughs like Newham, Camden, RBKC, and others that are taking quite bold and bright approaches to renewal, setting new measures of well-being and success. These need to be the value metrics that drive the public sector's own ability and its own commitment to lever the things it can control. It needs to demonstrate its commitment by doing. And part of that is about using asset portfolios and saying, okay, an on-paper discount is an investment in something else. It's an investment in these types of value outcomes. And we want to create a right market where the market failures around affordability and bringing together opportunities for people are addressed through the way we approach our own assets. And we've seen through the international house model that doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. There is an ability to return an income to the council in exchange for the use of those assets. But the right playing field needs to be created in affordability, alongside working with the communities, understanding what models might work, which buildings are appropriate, and a lot of expertise around understanding what the unpolished gems are in that portfolio to bring forward a suite of assets in the right areas that can genuinely deliver on these public sector objectives for inclusive economy.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, what I'd like to do is come to, oh, Louise, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sorry, I jumped in there quite late. I guess just building on what Dan and Jacob have said, there's this issue of kind of, it feels to me like over the last decade, there's been a maturing of the debate from a kind of a not in my backyard approach to a much more sophisticated one, like the one that's happening in Newham at the moment, which is not on those terms. Thank you. So it's about the terms of the terms that matter, because if you're going to deliver some public benefit, then we can talk. If you're just going to try and kind of leverage everything you can get out of the public sector to deliver your bottom line, then I'm less interested in that conversation. And I think it's just shifting that thing. It's like, yes, we're going to have this honest conversation, but the terms need to demonstrably deliver for communities as well as the shareholders.
Okay, does anyone else want to come in on that? Yeah, Binky.
I've just got one very small point, and it sort of refers back to what Louise was talking about, and that is behaviours. You know, we can all have a plan, and I think we've all got very good ideas about what could happen, but none of that will happen if there isn't a commitment to changing behaviour. And that is something that I think needs to be addressed. I don't know, you know, I would love this panel to discuss how that might happen, because there is a level of fear and caution sitting within councils that stops them thinking expansively. If we are going to get through this recovery, we have to say now is the time to start thinking expansively, thinking on as a multi-layered approach. Everybody's mentioned that in very different ways. You know, how do we loosen up to really meet the future in a way that is going to be successful for communities? And, you know, that's something that I'm just throwing out there. We need to find the lever that opens up this expansiveness to more than a panel just like this.
Well, I think that's a great question, and maybe we invite Roxana, because you talked about institutional culture and, you know, people not necessarily being willing to do things differently, thinking very traditionally. So Roxana, your thoughts on what Binky's just said?
Thank you very much, and I would absolutely embrace everything that she has said, because I've got the grey hairs to prove the mission it's been for me in my role, not just as the mayor, but actually the portfolio lead for inclusive economy and housing delivery here in Newham. And the nature of silo working in local authorities and in institutions such as ours or public bodies is legendary, and it's maddening when you're trying to actually get that delivery output in a way that's visionary, energizing for the community, is reflective of the promises that you have made. I couldn't tell you the amount of conversations I've had where I feel as if I'm either pulling my teeth or watching a car crash happening slowly or banging my head on a brick wall, because different parts of the system aren't talking to each other. And then going back to kind of like, you know, the required kind of like lateral wide bandwidth thinking required, that fundamentally for me is an issue around culture. Public sector agencies, particularly local authorities, are not steeped in a tradition of creative, innovative thinking. This is stuff that we are seeding in now, and when you've got an organisation comprising of 5,500 people, it's about opening up the possibilities through visionary thinking and articulating that week in, week out, and enabling the opportunities for those staff members that have an appetite to be part of that journey to step in, as opposed to be rigidly confined to their roles and their functions, and getting them to think in a very kind of horizontal and lateral way, both in terms of their thought processes, but also the way in which they practice their role or their function as an officer. We're way too linear, and I find it extraordinary, actually. And I say that as someone, you know, I'm the child of an immigrant who came from Pakistan in the early 60s. My father busted a gut to get over here, built his own family business. We had a factory, a garment factory in Aldgate, just off Lehman Street, and I used to spend my summer holidays just fascinated with the magic and the craftsmanship of garment making, and he used to supply at the time for the likes of Marks and Spencers and what was known as CNA, and that imbued in me a real kind of interest in that process of businesses, setting up your businesses, but also really opened up my imagination and creativity. So there's also something about how you seed that way of thinking about the world through both the education system, you know, your offer through adult learning skills, but also your own workforce. So I completely concur with what's been said in a very long way.
Thanks, Roxana. Dan, are you going to give us some inspiration and tell us about local authorities that are doing this expansive, creative, more broad-based way of thinking?
I was going to offer a very simple answer to a very complex question. I fully support that it starts with a top-down support and approach. So, for example, with Towards a Better Newham, as you'll see, Newham have replaced the traditional corporate plan with something different and more meaningful and very bold and ambitious. And because it's top-down, it affects the way decisions are taken politically and at the officer body. And that helps unlock silos. That's by no means an easy process, but it has to come with top-down support. The mandate for change and to be radical and bold has to start there. Secondly, you need to take a structured and rationed process to looking at these opportunities and turning the good ideas into reality. So look through the corporate and commercial asset portfolios. Which ones are the most market facing? Which ones are really important to income? Which ones are available soon? And which ones are absolute basket case assets that you couldn't do anything with? Within that mixture of things, there'll be some real gems in the right places to try something new. Then it's about starting to work with communities, local businesses to understand that sector and understand the operators that might be able to work with the council on the terms they need. And then, you know, like the old back of the magazine says, here's 3 chords, now go and start a band. We need to not be afraid to start and go and experiment and to say, okay, for 18 months, we're going to take this basket of assets. We're going to work with these parties. We're going to try different things because these matter to what we're trying to achieve with our communities, and recognize that process needs time to ripen and to turn into something meaningful. And it isn't a paper-based exercise, it's a people-based exercise. And it needs the time and breathing space to be tried and got right.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that before Jacob? Yeah.
I mean, I fully agree with what Binky, Voxana, and Dan were saying around the need for local authorities to be more agile. You know, perhaps to promote a bit more of a brave way of working, and to empower people to almost have a bit more opportunity to take risks and to push the envelope and develop new models. I think that's really important. I just wanted to follow up a point Louise made a few comments ago around local authority assets and kind of a change in mindset around we only want to dispose on the, we're only willing to engage on this asset if it's on the right terms, and if it's not on the right terms, we're not interested. I think that's so important, and there's something I wanted to highlight around that, because I think it's a fundamental issue that everyone should be thinking about. If councils and the public sector are going to use their assets to ensure that, as part of any partnership, any disposal, whatever you want to call it, the council's ambitions, key value metrics, key agenda items are delivered, there needs to be very long-term thinking around what the social and economic value of any project is going to be. It's not just about, which company's willing to pay the highest rent or the most amount of money to, buy that land. I think there's an intrinsic problem here that people should be aware of, which is the vast majority of real estate development is done by developers who build something and then sell a bunch of flats or lease an office and flog it off. And with no disrespect, there are many developers out there who put placemaking and social impact at the core of their agenda. But ultimately, if they're building something to sell, there's no long-term alignment between the developer and the local authority. And therefore, the best set plans, the best of intentions up front are always going to deliver a misalignment between local authority and community value and what the developer ends up doing, because the developer's only looking at a very short period of time. Whereas the return on investment and the value created for the local authority from that piece of land needs to be thought about as a much more holistic, long-term thing. Operators, unlike developers, have a much more vested interest in the long-term delivery, in long-term goals, in long-term management, because they need to manage and maintain assets for the long term. And year after year, they have to continue creating value. So they have to keep investing, they have to keep delivering on the promises, otherwise it doesn't work. So I think when you recognize that there's a difference between developer and operator, councils need to kind of treat the two slightly differently. There's a really important piece, I think, around how public sector bodies secure the kind of social aspects of value creation and value to be delivered out of public sector assets through kind of creative legal wording in Section 106s and partnership agreements to ensure that a development doesn't just end on the day of completion, and actually all of those social promises actually get delivered all the way through.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. I think I'd like to go to some of the questions. We've got loads of questions. So which one shall I pick? Let's go for, okay. So it's a question from Nadeem. Daniel and Jacob, is reuse refurbish model always the best approach for asset management? For example, if you had a 10,000 square foot building that can be refurbished into a 12,000 square foot building, but a new build would create 20,000 square feet, environmentally friendly building on the same footprint, would you actively pursue the new build option?
That's a really good question, Nicola. And I think, to be honest, it'd probably be worth bringing Harry into this discussion as well, having sort of looked at very similar conundrums on projects with himself operationally. I would suggest that, what is your ability to get the outcome you want in those scenarios? The building that already exists, and the refurbishment program is probably quicker than development and less risky in terms of the outcomes. And there is a whole bunch of arguments about reuse of assets being greener than knocking down and starting with fresh materials that Harry's better placed to comment on than I. But I think rather than make this an academic discussion, it should be about what purpose does that building need to serve, and when and how. I think if it involves development and starting again, you need to recognise that's great, but you're looking a couple of years down the line before that benefit is actually made available for that area.
Harry, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to say that, you know, the approach I'm suggesting is not to say that, you know, development is never appropriate. Of course, in many instances. It's just to say that specifically with council-owned assets, I think there is a prerogative, especially in light of the fact that the GLA and 26 of the boroughs have declared a climate emergency, to consider the responsibility they have with their existing assets, whether or not they are able to reuse them in the first instance. So yeah, I think that is the point that we're looking to make around it being greener to use existing buildings. I think there's also a huge embodied carbon cost. I think it's 35 to 40% of embodied carbon comes within the construction phase of a building. So I mean, that's already there, and that's why there is the environmental imperative to look at things in that way. I think the other point to make around old buildings and affordable use, I made it earlier around the cost barriers which come with service charge and business rates. But I think there's another harder to define point which comes with these existing sort of civic structures and buildings and the resonance they have with local communities. I think they're much more approachable, and they are a reference point and something that, you know, local communities over a series of generations have used and interacted with. And in many ways, it's more appropriate for them to continue this role than for there to be this big glass tower which comes up. And for many communities, that's not, it doesn't feel like a very approachable or usable space for the type of affordable activity that we are that we're talking about. So yeah, hopefully that goes some way to answering.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was very much a kind of a strong point that Binky was talking about, wasn't it? About actually, are those spaces going to feel comfortable for people? Binky, you've got your hand up anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really to reinforce the point that for councils to be thinking they have a huge issue with the perception of gentrification. Well, you know, let's take it head on and really put regeneration in a place which is about regenerating communities and people, which is reusing their existing assets. I would also like to say a small point about where those assets lie. They may not all be in the centre of town. They may not all be kind of traditional building shapes. There's garages, shops, there's all sorts of things. But if we're also talking about building resilience within communities and supporting that diversity, then put artists into garages in estates, put you know, pop-ups into estate shops. You know, we can create very interesting, as we were saying, we're all moving towards this hyper-local 15-minute vision. We can support that by using those assets in other places other than the centre of town. And I think that is another really important way to kind of use the wealth of talent and energy and passion that communities have now for building themselves. You know, we're all keen to be part of this effort, and I think councils really need to let that happen, and spaces like International House do that really well. Okay,
thank you. Right, we're going to move on to the next question. So it's Neil MacDonald, two sort of similar questions, but I think it was responding to your point, Binky. So circumstance surely provides motivation to councils to use their powers of general competence, provided the Localism Act, to say allocate Section 106 funds and use powers such as compulsory purchase orders to acquire assets at best value to be reused by communities for short, medium and long-term recovery led by communities. What are the panel's thoughts on the potential use of such powers?
Do you want me to have a go at that one, Nicola?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yes, well, I mean, we're involved in developing something that I hope in Brixton will be a route through to this, which is a co-design process for communities to be meaningfully involved in the development that happens around them. I think as Jacob was saying, the understanding of how 106 actually works. So there's a knowledge share to happen, most definitely. How does this stuff actually work? We really need to know as communities what goes on. We need to understand the language needs to change and diversify, and we need to see absolutely how those documents can be used to sort of lock in that community benefit for the long term. However, there is still a need to sort of devolve more power through this. You know, this is very much in its sort of nascent stages. So there's hand-holding to be done. There's reassurance to happen that, you know, that there isn't some other community agenda happening here, but actually locking in the community's perspective into the root and the basis of the building is about securing that building as an important part of the area's future, because people will be using it and they'll be using it in the right way. And that in itself attracts those from outside. It doesn't happen really the other way round.
Okay, brilliant. Anyone else want to come in on that question about using local authority powers? No, avoiding that one. Okay. Let's have another question. I'm going for from experience, this is from Luke Hayes, councils just need to ditch the red tape. I'm not sure there is a less blunt way to put it, but if there can be more commercial minds in local government delivery, more commercial minds in local government delivery can happen rapidly without making fear of a decision. I guess that's exactly the point that Roxana raised earlier about having a different culture and people thinking more expansively. There's questions about sustainability, which we've already had. So maybe, because we're sort of coming towards the end now, maybe, oh, sorry, Louise, you've got your hand up.
Oh, my hand was broken. I completely, I mean, kind of bridging between those two questions, I completely embrace that idea of innovation happening within the local authority and becoming more kind of sophisticated about the kind of business and financing dimensions of it, but also not being naive about locking in the community benefit and always remembering that we serve our communities. I mean, one of the examples that I would really draw people's attention to is, you know, the journey that we've taken. What I've seen over the last few years is across the Good Growth Fund and interventions that we've done, there's been lots of singular interventions, and they absolutely reflect Roxana's description of headbanging and brick walls and all of that, where you're trying to get one innovative thing to happen in one place. And really, I hope that we're on the kind of cusp of flipping that into a more systematic and sharing the learnings, sharing the behaviours, sharing the kind of ways that you do that, and sharing the ways that you invite the community in to kind of co-define these processes. One place that I would draw like attention to, there's things like, you know, in South Kilburn, we did a really nice refurbishment, and I think some of the designers are on the call. And they're now working in Hammersmith and Fulham on a project around community growing and community cooking. And they're both really interesting examples. What I would love is to see both of those local authorities systematize that now and, you know, learn from that lesson and then look at what they can do. One of the places that's doing that really, really well is Sutton. You may have heard about the Sutton Works project, where a former BHS department store has been repurposed. Partly on the ground floor, you've got H&M going in there with some of the first floor, but all of the back and upper floors of that building, I think it's about 60,000 square feet, are being repurposed as a multi-generational shared community working space. And that's fantastic. But what's even more exciting about what they're doing down in Sutton is that it's not just a one-off. They have a kind of a clear strategy across their high street. They have 6 sites that they're going to intervene into, and they're going to kind of diversify and get on the front foot about diversifying their local economy. So
yeah, hang on, someone just.
So recently they delivered the Sound Lounge, which is a kind of a multi-purpose.
Bear with us. I'm trying to turn off.
Is that me? That's
no,
not me.
I think there's someone else. Yeah, I think they're trying to mute themselves. Carry on, Louise.
So the Sound Lounge, which was delivered, a meanwhile place, a space that's been delivered. It's got music making and other kind of local organisations, including the BID in the building. And that was delivered using VIY, which are a really interesting organisation. Sutton Works got £1.3 million from the GLA Good Growth Fund. And then what's interesting is they were one of the first local authorities in London to secure the Future High Street funding from central government. So they've got 11 million plus to deliver on that wider strategy. And the picture I was trying to paint there is that they've got their strategy, they've done singular interventions, and as they've gone along, they've built that confidence, and now they're securing and unlocking bigger funding opportunities. And I think it's a really good example, and I would refer everybody to that. I'll drop something into the chat that gives you a link to a write-up on it.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to invite each of you just to say, if we could do one thing to move this agenda forward from your perspective, what would that be? And I'm literally going to give you sort of 8 seconds each. So I'm going to run around the screen, and we're going to let's start with Daniel, and then Binky, and then Louise. If you could do one thing, what would it be?
Each local authority, pick 10 assets in your portfolio, put them to one side, try and find a new plan and something exciting to do with them.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Binky, Louise, and then Jacob.
Okay, well, I'll take Dan's 10 assets, and I'll say work with the local community in a co-design process that decides the use of those assets, and then we lock it all into a 106, thanks Jacob, with the right language, and yeah, you've got your community working on your recovery.
I feel like we're building a nice story like you'd play when you were kids. Right, Louise, what would you do to those 10 buildings that's now got community buy-in?
I'll take Binky's community engagement thing, and I'll add in a clear definition of the social benefits and the social return.
Okay, we've got Jacob and then Roxana.
Well, have to make sure that none of those, as the developer, have to make sure that none of those buildings get knocked down. And so it would be encouraging the local authority to set out, I think, some really clear guidelines for the developer community around what the key local authority ambitions are over the next 10 to 15 years to ensure that all future developments have to comply with, maybe not every single one, but if there's an agenda of 10, that each project that comes forward has to clearly define how it's contributing to 3 or 4 of those key local authority ambitions.
Fantastic. So we're going to go to Roxana, and then Harry and Alex. I'll give you, it's probably the hardest job to be at the end.
By saying I agree with everyone else and what they've said so far, but I will say that I would use part of that asset in collaborating in a co-production, co-designed way with either a group of young people from our youth empowerment network or from communities to sort of develop something really interesting and innovative and visionary that can be a case in point of what you can do.
Thank you, Roxana. Harry?
I would look to establish some sort of structure in order to look at those assets as a portfolio, some sort of social value property management company, which would allow for a cross subsidy of revenue and outputs between the different assets.
Great, thank you. And Alex?
Yeah, I think we probably need a little bit of investment as well to make sure that those who are taking on the assets have the right skills and experience and resources to be able to make the best of it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to call it a day there. Thank you so much to our speakers, Binky, Dan, Louise, Jacob, Roxana, Alex, and Harry, both for joining us a bit later on. Thanks obviously to our sponsors. We've got PRD, General Projects, Hackney Week and Fish Island, Community Trust, Community Development Trust, and I know I've forgotten one, and Redo. Thanks, sorry, Harry. Thank you so much for enabling us to put on this webinar. Alex, I hope you don't mind me letting everyone know that you're going to pull together some of the findings from this webinar and do maybe some follow-up interviews with panelists, just create a kind of a short guide or report that really kind of sets out what needs to happen to move this agenda forward. So thank you very much in advance for doing that, Alex. It's fantastic. Though this session has been recorded, so it will go up on our YouTube channel. So if you want to share that with colleagues or peers, by all means, please do that. My colleagues is going to put in a link now to a Creative Use of Assets podcast that was chaired by Chris from PRD, which tells the story of how this agenda has played out in Hackney over really the last 10 years, with Sarah Turnbull and Ian Williams talking about how they've kind of working together on this agenda. Really, really interesting. Again, I recommend you go and have a listen to that if you haven't done already. And then all of our Learning from Crisis content is up on the website as well. There's a link in the chat. And then finally, just like to say, our main programme for this year is called Building Recovery, Closing the Gap. And it's looking at how we're going to build back the city, but really trying to address the equalities gap. So looking at all kinds of things, from culture and leisure to affordable homes, to public space, to employment and skills. So if you're interested in that, again, the link's on the chat, and please do give me a shout. We're always looking for really good case studies, interesting thoughts and perceptions on that topic. Thanks to everyone that's come along today. Thanks for all your questions. Sorry we couldn't get through all of them today, but thanks very much for your participation, and I hope to see you in a Future of London event very soon. Take care. Thanks very much, everyone.